In the mid-1990s, a gang of professional bank robbers was wreaking havoc across 7 states. Their heists were executed with precision, speed, and almost ghost-like anonymity, always wearing masks and leaving no traces behind. Over time, they managed to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars, using a terrifying strategy. They threatened their victims with what appeared to be explosive devices. With no solid leads, law enforcement was growing desperate. The FBI knew they had to track down the criminals before the violence escalated and lives were lost. Armed robberies became a disturbing trend in the Midwest, with banks being hit almost on a monthly basis. The criminals struck fast and with force, never lingering for more than 5 minutes inside their targets. I'm Jim Carlstrom, former head of the FBI field office in New York. A former investigator recalls, "The case became more urgent when we realized that these robberies weren't just about personal gain. There was something bigger behind them. To stop this dangerous crew, the FBI knew they had to capture the ringleaders." It was January 25, 1994, in Ames, Iowa, a peaceful small town known for its low crime rates. Life moved at a slow, comfortable pace. That morning, at exactly 10:30 a.m., 2 men stormed into a local bank. "This is a robbery. Get down." Down on the floor, they shouted. They wore ski masks and carried semi-automatic pistols, waving them wildly as they ordered everyone to the ground. The employees, well-trained for emergencies, silently triggered the bank's alarm system without the robbers noticing. Meanwhile, at an FBI office in nearby Des Moines, agents were alerted to the ongoing heist. Since armed bank robbery is a federal crime, the case immediately fell under the FBI's jurisdiction. However, there was one problem. The field office was nearly 50 kilometers, about 30 miles, away. Back at the scene, the robbers worked quickly, emptying the cash registers while keeping their guns trained on the terrified hostages. "Don't move. Look away," one of them barked. Then, one of the criminals pulled out what looked like a bomb. "Nobody moves for the next 5 minutes, or this thing blows," he warned. No one dared to test his threat. Employees and customers remained frozen in place, waiting for the nightmare to be over. Once the time was up, they ran for safety. Law enforcement quickly arrived and sealed off the area around the bank. Explosives experts were called in to defuse the device. To everyone's relief, it turned out to be a fake, a crude construct made of 2 road flares duct taped together. As investigators pieced together witness testimonies, a pattern began to emerge. One bank employee recalled how a robber had leaned over the counter to grab the cash. "I was standing right here," she later told authorities, describing the scene in detail. Within 5 minutes, the criminals had made off with thousands of dollars in cash. The FBI interrogated witnesses, hoping for a crucial lead. "Anything else you can tell us?" an agent asked. One key detail surfaced. Some of the robbers had spoken Spanish during the heist. Security cameras provided grainy images of the suspects, but their faces were completely hidden under ski masks. However, the footage did offer clues: their clothing, their movements, and their weapons. They had used 9mm semi-automatic pistols, and they wore gloves, meaning no fingerprints were left behind. The only physical evidence recovered was a single footprint near the counter. Special Agent Ken Moore, working out of the Des Moines office, analyzed the case and felt a growing unease. "These guys aren't amateurs," he observed. "Most bank robbers try to keep things quiet, approach a teller, take the money, and get out. But these guys, they hit hard, fast, and with extreme aggression." Moore and his team were determined to stop them. The problem? They had no idea who they were up against. Weeks passed without a breakthrough. Then, on February 15, 1994, the FBI received word of another robbery, this time in Davenport, Iowa. The agents at the Des Moines field office immediately contacted their counterparts in Davenport to compare notes. "I think we got the same guys," an officer in Davenport reported. Just like in the Ames case, 2 masked men had stormed into the bank, shouting in Spanish as they leaped over the counter to grab cash. But this time, there was a chilling difference. The robbers had left behind a real explosive device. Fortunately, the bomb lacked a detonator, but its presence alone changed everything. "This slows us down," an agent admitted. "Defusing a real bomb ties up crucial resources. It delays the investigation. The FBI was now convinced that these weren't isolated incidents. The similarities between the two heists suggested that they were dealing with the same criminals. This was our first real clue that we might be looking at a serial robbery case, an investigator later explained. Over the next 4 months, the robberies continued. Banks in Cincinnati, Green Bay, and Kansas City were hit, all following the same pattern. The FBI studied the details carefully, trying to find a way to predict the gang's next move. They always struck between 10 and 11 a.m., when banks were least crowded. Their heists never lasted more than 5 minutes. In every case, they left behind an explosive device. Their targets were spread out across multiple states, making it nearly impossible to anticipate their next location. They're smart, one agent noted. The wide range of locations keeps us guessing. But the FBI knew one thing for sure. They needed evidence, something that could tie these crimes to specific individuals. Then, on June 8, 1994, they got their first real break. On that day, the robbers struck again, this time in Springdale, Ohio. It was their biggest haul yet, netting them over $100,000. But for the first time, a witness saw something useful. A passerby reported seeing the criminals flee in a brown Chevrolet. 9 days later, on June 17th, a security guard noticed an abandoned car in a parking lot he patrolled. The vehicle had been sitting there for over a week, and something inside caught his attention. A police scanner. There was also a pager and a filthy duffel bag sitting on the front seat. A local police officer arrived to inspect the vehicle. When he pried open the glove compartment, something rolled out onto the floor. A grenade. After a tense moment, the officers determined it wasn't live, but it was enough to confirm a connection to the robberies. "We got something here," an investigator said. Using the car's serial number, agents traced it back to the dealership where it had been sold. The dealership provided information on the buyer, but the description was vague. "That sale was only a few weeks ago," the salesman recalled. "But I can't remember exactly what the guy looked like." The trail went cold. The frustration within the FBI was mounting. Not only were the criminals still at large, but their methods were growing more violent. They were getting bolder, an agent explained. They started threatening bank employees with firearms, terrorizing customers, and leaving behind bombs. It was escalating. Then came December 27, 1994. This time, the robbers changed the game. Instead of operating as a two-man team, they struck in a group of 4. That alarmed investigators. "If there are 4 of them now," an agent admitted, "it increases the chances of hostage situations, or even vault break-ins. It makes things much more dangerous." That day, in St. Louis, they were spotted before the robbery. A group of bystanders saw the men putting on ski masks outside the bank. One bank employee even managed to catch a glimpse of one of their faces before they stormed inside. Finally, investigators had a description. Using the witness descriptions, the FBI put together sketches of the suspects and distributed them to law enforcement agencies and the media. Public awareness led to a flood of tips. Hundreds of calls came in, but none of them led to a solid lead. Then, something unexpected happened. The robbers themselves reached out. They began sending letters and drawings to newspapers, mocking the FBI and law enforcement. In one of their messages, they gave themselves a name, the Midwest Bandits. It was a chilling move. They were taunting us, an agent later admitted. They wanted us to know they were out there, and they thought they were untouchable. But they had made a mistake during one of their getaways. The robbers left behind a clue, something that hinted at their deeper motives. On the front seat of a stolen getaway car, agents found a newspaper clipping. It was about Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. By the summer of 1995, the FBI had confirmed what they had long suspected. The Midwest Bandits weren't just ordinary bank robbers. The discovery of a newspaper clipping about Timothy McVeigh, the man behind the Oklahoma City bombing, suggested a connection to extremist ideologies. This wasn't just about money, an agent later explained. They were funding something bigger, something dangerous. The realization sent a wave of urgency through the investigation. The bandits had already pulled off at least 15 robberies, and there was no sign they were slowing down. If they were using the stolen money to support a larger cause, the stakes were even higher than the FBI had anticipated. At the end of August 1995, a critical meeting took place. FBI agents from field offices across 7 states gathered in Louisville, Kentucky, to combine their efforts. This is no longer just a string of robberies. Special Agent Ken Moore told the assembled investigators, "We need to find out who these people are fast." The agents pooled their information, reviewing every robbery in minute detail. Leads were reassigned, old case files were combed through again, and every piece of evidence was scrutinized. That's when Special Agent David Welker found something interesting. While going through old case files, Welker came across a tip that had been received by the Cincinnati FBI office after a bank robbery in June 1994. An anonymous caller had provided the names of 2 men believed to be the ringleaders of the gang, Peter Langan and Richard Guthrie. At the time, the lead had gone nowhere. There was no solid evidence linking the men to the crimes. But now, with a string of robberies across the Midwest and a growing concern about extremist ties, the names took on new significance. A background check on both men revealed startling details. Langan had a criminal history and had previously served time for robbing a pizzeria. Guthrie had a history of making threats against government officials and had once been under Secret Service surveillance for threatening the president. When Guthrie was arrested years earlier, authorities had confiscated semi-automatic pistols and grenades, the same types of weapons being used in the Midwest bank heists. The pieces were starting to fit. When I compared their police mugshots to the sketches we had from the bank witnesses, Agent Welker recalled, "It was incredible. The resemblance was nearly perfect. It was like the artist had drawn straight from their photos." Now, the FBI finally had names. They knew who they were after. But finding them would be another challenge. Despite their violent robberies and extremist connections, Langan and Guthrie weren't constantly on the run. Instead, they were careful. They would disappear into hiding after each heist, only resurfacing when it was time to strike again. Langan and Guthrie weren't your typical criminals, an investigator later said. They lived underground, resurfacing only when necessary. But the FBI wasn't about to let them vanish. Investigators knew that the men were likely still operating in the Midwest, and they had one advantage. Guthrie liked to talk. A confidential informant, who had once been close to Langan and Guthrie, was located in Georgia. When questioned, he was hesitant at first, claiming that he'd severed all ties with the 2 men. "I don't want anything to do with them," he insisted. "That's in my past." But with some persuasion, the informant began to talk. The informant revealed that Peter Langan had been deeply involved in extremist groups since the early 1990s. He saw himself as a revolutionary, the informant explained. He hated the government and thought he was part of something bigger. Langan had been inspired by the Order, a violent white supremacist group that had funded its operations through bank and armored truck robberies in the 1980s. The Order had stolen over $4 million to support their cause before being dismantled by the FBI. Langan had taken their methods and formed his own faction, the Aryan Republican Army. The informant provided valuable insight into how the gang operated. They financed their movement through bank robberies, just like the Order. They carefully scouted banks before hitting them. They communicated through coded messages and pagers. They had connections with other extremist groups across the country. The more the FBI learned, the more dangerous the case became. This wasn't just a group of guys robbing banks for fun, an agent later said. They were building something, a network, an organization. The next few months were spent gathering intelligence and tightening the net. The FBI monitored known associates, tapped into extremist circles, and worked with informants to track the gang's movements. Then, in December 1995, the Midwest bandits struck again. This time, it was in Cincinnati. During their getaway, one of the robbers collided with a teenage girl on the street. The girl resisted as the robber tried to steal her purse. The scene played out in mere seconds, but it was long enough to catch the attention of several witnesses, and more importantly, long enough for nearby police sirens to get closer. Panicked, the robbers fled, barely escaping capture. This was the first time they'd gotten sloppy, an FBI agent noted. They were starting to make mistakes. The FBI was certain the gang was still hiding somewhere in the area. And now, they had a secret weapon, their informant. The FBI brought their informant to Cincinnati, hoping he could track down his old associates. "You know these guys," an agent told him. "Find them." At first, the informant came up with nothing. Weeks passed, and he failed to make contact with Langan or Guthrie. Investigators began to lose faith in him. He was here for over a week and had nothing to show for it, an agent later admitted. No leads, no meetings, nothing. We started doubting whether he was actually useful. Then, at 2:30 a.m. on January 17, 1996, the informant called the FBI. Half asleep and skeptical, the agents took the call. "I found Guthrie," the informant said. That single sentence changed everything. Guthrie had been spotted at a local restaurant, casually chatting with an acquaintance. The informant approached him, pretending he was just passing through town. "Hey, I need to talk to you," he told Guthrie. Guthrie, cautious but intrigued, suggested they step outside to talk privately. They walked to Guthrie's van, the very vehicle he used for his getaways. Inside, Guthrie hinted that he and Langan were still active. "This ain't kid stuff anymore," he warned. "We're serious. Fully armored, armor-piercing rounds. No games." The informant memorized everything: the van's color, its license plate, and its exact location. Then he made his move. "I need to buy cigarettes," he said. He walked away, got into his car, and drove straight to the FBI. With the informant's tip in hand, the FBI had their first real chance to capture Richard Guthrie. The agents wasted no time. They devised a plan to arrest him without giving him the opportunity to flee or, worse, go down in a violent shootout. The informant was instructed to arrange a meeting with Guthrie, supposedly to discuss a potential job. The location, a friend's apartment. The plan was simple: wait for Guthrie to arrive, then take him down the moment he walked through the door. The agents set up surveillance near the apartment, waiting for their target. But as the hours passed, Guthrie never showed. Then, at 5:20 p.m., the phone rang. It was Guthrie. He told the informant that he had changed the meeting location. Instead of the apartment, he wanted to meet at a pizza restaurant nearby. The FBI had no choice but to adapt. The informant, playing his role carefully, agreed. As soon as Guthrie hung up, the agents scrambled to reposition their teams. A convoy of FBI vehicles rushed to the new location. But in the city's traffic, the team got separated. An agent, driving ahead of the others, spotted Guthrie outside a supermarket near his van. Instead of waiting for backup, he made a quick decision. He turned his car around, radioed his team, and started tailing Guthrie. The chase had begun. January 17, 1996. The FBI was now in an active pursuit of Richard Guthrie, one of the most wanted bank robbers in the country. As soon as Guthrie noticed he was being followed, he stepped on the gas. His van sped through the streets of Cincinnati, weaving through traffic in a desperate attempt to shake his pursuers. More FBI vehicles joined the chase, blocking possible escape routes. But Guthrie wasn't giving up that easily. He wasn't just a suspect, one of the agents later said. He was a guy with automatic weapons, explosives, and nothing to lose. Guthrie took a sharp turn onto a narrow street, only to find himself at a dead end. The FBI vehicle surrounded him. With nowhere to go, Guthrie jumped out of the van and started running toward a riverbank. An agent, sprinting behind him, shouted, "FBI, stop right there." Guthrie kept running. He was calculating something, the agent recalled. You could see it in his movements. He was deciding, do I give up or do I go out in a blaze of gunfire? He reached the edge of the river, turned around, and faced the agents. His hand hovered near his waist. "Hands up! Turn around!" the agents ordered. A tense moment passed. Finally, Guthrie raised his hands. He had made his choice. The FBI took him into custody. With Guthrie in custody, the FBI now had an even bigger target in their sights: Peter Langan. The agents immediately began interrogating Guthrie. But they had to be careful. If they pushed too hard, he might refuse to talk. Instead of direct questioning, they let him talk on his own terms. It worked. Guthrie revealed that he and Langdon used encrypted messages to communicate. He even handed over his pager and PIN number, a critical lead for the FBI. Guthrie also lied about where their next meeting would be. He claimed Langdon was planning to meet him in Indianapolis. The FBI wasn't convinced, so they played along, pretending to set up a sting operation in Indianapolis. Then, as Guthrie grew comfortable with his FBI guards, who happened to share his interest in firearms and aviation, he let something slip. The real meeting was in Columbus, Ohio. Now, the FBI knew exactly where to go. The next morning, January 18, 1996, the FBI Special Operations team gathered outside a small house in Columbus, Ohio. Langdon's van was parked outside. The plan was simple. Wait for him to enter the van, then block him in before he could drive away. They needed to prevent a high-speed chase, or, worse, a gunfight in a residential area. At 9:30 a.m., Langdon walked out of the house, carrying a cloth bag. He always had weapons on him, an agent recalled. We had to assume there was a gun inside that bag. Langdon climbed into his van. Then he did something unexpected. He just sat there, not moving, not starting the engine, almost as if he was waiting for something. The FBI agents held their breath, waiting for the right moment. Then, over the radio, the command finally came. Go. Now. The FBI agents sprang into action. Several vehicles boxed in Langdon's van, preventing any chance of escape. Armed agents surrounded the vehicle, weapons drawn, prepared for anything. Langdon remained motionless in the driver's seat. For a moment, there was complete silence. No one could tell what he was thinking. Then, suddenly, he reached for something. The agents reacted instantly. Hands where we can see them, they shouted. Langdon hesitated. Then, instead of reaching for a weapon, he lifted his hands into the air. The FBI rushed forward, yanked open the van's door, and dragged him out onto the pavement. It was over in seconds. Despite being surrounded by more than 20 federal agents, Langdon had chosen to surrender. Inside his van, the FBI found an arsenal, semi-automatic weapons, ammunition, grenades, and disguises, including ski masks and FBI hats. In the cloth bag he had carried, they found a 9mm pistol, the same model used in the bank robberies. The FBI agents searched the house he had been staying in. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Langdon and his group weren't just bank robbers. They had been building an extremist militia. Inside, agents found enough weapons and explosives to equip a small terrorist unit. There were also forged law enforcement IDs, stacks of radical literature, and recruitment materials for the Aryan Republican Army. Perhaps most disturbing was a videotape. It wasn't a confession or footage of a robbery. It was a propaganda video meant to recruit young white supremacists into their movement. Today we take over America. Tomorrow the world. Langdon refused to cooperate after his arrest, but the FBI didn't need him to talk. They now had enough evidence to take down the entire group. One of the most important witnesses was a bank employee from Columbus. She had seen the robbers' faces for only a few seconds, 17 months ago. The FBI showed her a lineup of photos. Without hesitation, she pointed at Peter Langdon. They had their man. Meanwhile, Guthrie, who had agreed to cooperate for a reduced sentence, was providing detailed confessions. He remembered everything. The locations, the dates, the weapons, the disguises. For days, he gave hour-by-hour accounts of the robberies. Everything was documented. 99 pages of detailed testimony. The only problem? Guthrie barely knew the real names of his accomplices. Like a terrorist cell, the gang members had been careful. They used aliases, avoided personal details, and didn't share their real backgrounds. The FBI needed more. Guthrie only knew that one of his accomplices was named Scott and had something to do with music. The other, named Kevin, was a nephew of a police officer. It wasn't much to go on, but it was enough. The FBI passed this information to their Philadelphia field office, where agents began combing through police records. At first, it seemed impossible. There were over 7,000 police officers in Philadelphia. But then a break came. One officer recognized the name Kevin McCarthy, a a young man connected to racist organizations. They followed the lead to a music studio in Philadelphia, where they found their second suspect, Scott Stedford. He wasn't just a musician. He had been one of the getaway drivers in the Midwest bank robberies. The FBI now had almost the entire gang in custody. But there was one last unexpected twist. Just when it seemed like the case was wrapped up, the FBI faced an unexpected setback. Richard Guthrie, who had agreed to testify against his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence, was found dead in his prison cell on July 3rd, 1996. He had hanged himself. His sudden death sent shockwaves through the case. For prosecutors, it was a disaster. Guthrie had been their star witness, the key to securing airtight convictions against the rest of the gang. Without his testimony, much of the case against Langan and the others was weakened. FBI agents scrambled to recover. If they couldn't use Guthrie's confession, they needed another witness to tie Langan and his accomplices to the crimes. They turned to Kevin McCarthy. At first, McCarthy refused to cooperate, but when agents showed him the 99-page confession Guthrie had left behind, detailing everything, his attitude changed. He realized the FBI already knew everything. They just needed evidence. McCarthy agreed to testify, but it still wasn't enough. The FBI needed one more witness, someone who could confirm that Langan was the ringleader. They focused on a man who had shaped the group's ideology from the start, Mark Thomas. Thomas had been a mentor to Langan, Stedford, and McCarthy. He ran a white supremacist website, wrote extremist propaganda, and had recruited young men into radical organizations. He had never participated in the bank robberies, but his influence over the group was undeniable. The FBI began harassing Thomas, visiting him regularly, watching his movements, making sure he knew he was a suspect. After months of pressure, Thomas cracked. He cut a deal, agreeing to confirm everything McCarthy had already told the FBI. With his testimony, the case was airtight. Langan was found guilty of armed bank robbery and sentenced to life in prison. Scott Stedford received 29 years. Kevin McCarthy, having cooperated, got only 5 years. Mark Thomas, despite his ideological leadership, served only 9.5 years. The Aryan Republican Army was dismantled, but the case left behind a disturbing truth. Radical groups like Langan's continued to exist, operating in the shadows, waiting for their moment to rise. This wasn't just a bank robbery case. An FBI agent later said, "This was domestic terrorism, and it won't be the last time we see it." Even though the Midwest bandits were caught, the threat they represented never really disappeared. The case was closed, but the fight against extremist violence was far from over.